Welcome. Today we're going to dive into The Order of Things, which is just a monumental work by the philosopher Michel Foucault. Now, we're not going to treat this as just some history of ideas. Instead, we're going to explore it as a really profound and honestly unsettling diagnosis of the modern condition. It's an attempt to understand a deep intellectual crisis that shapes the very way you and I think today.
So let's start with this really powerful metaphor, an autopsy. Think about that for a second. An autopsy isn't about celebrating a life or tracing some kind of gentle evolution. No, an autopsy is performed after a death to figure out the cause. So in this view, Foucault isn't just a historian. He's more like a pathologist, carefully examining the quiet death of a certain kind of confidence, a deep collapse in the very foundations of how the West understood truth and knowledge, and, well, humanity itself.
So these are the two big questions that are going to guide us through this entire explainer. So Foucault, you'll see, provides a stunning diagnosis of what happened. He exposes these fragile, hidden structures beneath our modern way of knowing. But to understand why it happened, we're going to need to introduce another lens, a different framework, that might just explain the very gaps that Foucault so brilliantly uncovered. Okay, to begin, we really have to get a handle on Foucault's primary tool. He called his method an archaeology. And like a traditional archaeologist, he wasn't really interested in the grand stories of progress, the ones told by kings and generals. No, he was interested in the soil itself, the deep, underlying layers of thought that make certain ideas and even certain historical events possible in the first place. And the core concept he uncovers is something he calls the episteme. Now, an episteme isn't a specific theory or philosophy you could just write down. It's more like the unconscious, underlying set of rules for an entire era. You can think of it as the intellectual grammar that dictates what even counts as a valid question, what's accepted as evidence, and what is just simply unthinkable. It's the invisible architecture that stages all the knowledge of a given age. Foucault identifies three of these major epistemes in Western thought, and the shift between them is not some smooth, linear progression. It's a rupture, a sudden, jarring break. In the Renaissance, for instance, knowledge worked through resemblance. The world was seen as this text full of signs and echoes. Then, in the classical age, that symbolic world just vanishes. It's replaced by this drive to order, to classify, to create these vast tables of knowledge. But the most consequential rupture of all is the modern one, where a totally new figure appears at the center of everything, man. And for the first time, this figure becomes both the one who knows and the thing to be known. To illustrate this, Foucault uses a really famous example, Velázquez's painting Las Meninas. He actually opens his book with it, and for good reason. It's a perfect metaphor for the episteme. The painting is all about the complicated act of representation. You've got the artist, the subjects, the king and queen reflected in a mirror in the back. Even you, the viewer, are all caught in this complex system of gazes. Foucault's point is that knowledge is just like this. It's never a simple, direct look at reality. It is always framed, it's staged, and it's limited by the very system that makes it possible. Okay, so this brings us to Foucault's most stunning diagnosis, and it focuses on that third episteme, our modern age, and the invention of its central character, man. And we're not talking about man as in the human species, but man as a very specific philosophical and scientific concept that becomes the new ground for all knowledge. So what happens in this modern turn? Well, for the first time, humanity becomes its own object of intense scientific study. This is when we get biology, psychology, economics, all what we call the human sciences. And they treat the human person not as, say, a soul with a purpose or a moral agent in some cosmic drama, but as a phenomenon to be measured, analyzed, and explained. The result, as our source puts it, is an anthropology without transcendence. We succeed in making humanity legible, but in the process it becomes somehow thinner, diminished. And this is the crucial point right here. By placing man at the center of everything, as the foundation for all meaning and all knowledge, modernity gives him a totally impossible task. You're asking a creature to be its own creator, the source of its own intelligibility. And according to Foucault's diagnosis, this doesn't lead to liberation. It leads to a profound instability, a kind of fragmentation, and ultimately an exhaustion, as this unsupported identity begins to fracture under its own weight. So Foucault has given us this powerful diagnosis of what has happened to modern thought, but his archaeology doesn't really explain why it happened.
To understand the cause, we're going to introduce a different framework, one that's drawn from classical theology. It's called an ontology of privation, and it offers a really compelling way to interpret the very gaps that Foucault uncovered.
Okay, the core distinction is this. Most of us, I think, intuitively think of something like darkness or evil as active forces, substances that exist on their own. But in an ontology of privation, that's not how it works at all. Darkness has no being of its own, it is simply the absence of light. Evil is not some rival power to good, it is the decay or the lack of good. And falsehood isn't a counter-argument, it's the absence of coherence, a gap where meaning should be.
And here is how this connects right back to Foucault. His archaeology is brilliant at digging up the ruins and showing us all the fragmentation and the incoherence in modern thought. He shows us that things fell apart. But his method sort of describes these ruptures as historical accidents. The privation framework suggests something deeper, that these gaps aren't random. They are the evidence of something that has been withdrawn, an absence where light or coherence once was.
So let's try to apply this lens of privation to Foucault's diagnosis of modern anthropology. The argument goes like this. Modern thought doesn't attack the human person directly. Instead, it subtly, quietly hollows out the concept from within through a process of subtraction. This hollowing process isn't some loud, violent destruction. It's a quiet redescription. So the idea of an inner conscience gets explained away as mere psychological or social conditioning. The concept of moral desert, the idea that people deserve certain outcomes, is replaced by impartial procedures. And personal responsibility? Well, that just dissolves into vast impersonal systems where no single person is truly accountable. Each step removes a category that was once essential to a full vision of what a human person is.
And the crucial point here is that the rise of these purely procedural systems in our laws and ethics and bureaucracies isn't necessarily a sign of progress. From a privation perspective, it's a symptom. It's what a society is forced to invent when it can no longer confidently speak about objective good or moral desert. It's a compensation for a deeper ontological loss, the loss of a shared understanding of what a human being truly is and what they are for.
This same hollowing process applies to knowledge itself. The core issue becomes the relationship between how we represent the world and the ultimate source of its meaning. You see, in the pre-modern epistemes that Foucault described, knowledge was always a form of participation. You were discovering an order that was already there, receiving meaning from a reality that was seen as inherently intelligible. But in modernity, knowledge declares its independence. It becomes autonomous. Meaning isn't discovered in the world anymore. It's something we create, something we impose, something we manufacture. But when knowledge is severed from any grounding in a higher reality, it becomes sterile, it becomes self-referential. It can describe, but it can no longer illuminate. We now arrive at Foucault's most famous, most chilling, and probably most misunderstood image. At the very end of The Order of Things, he suggests that man might be erased, like a face drawn in sand at the edge of the sea. We're going to look at this image not as some prophecy, but as a profound warning. Just think about the properties of this image for a moment. Sand has no inherent form. A face drawn in it is a temporary imposition of meaning on something that can't hold that meaning on its own. It's entirely dependent on the artist, and it's incredibly vulnerable to the environment. This is Foucault's metaphor for the modern concept of man.
So, is this just a nihilistic prophecy that we're all doomed? Well, the interpretation offered by our sources is different. It's a warning about autonomy. The face vanishes not because the sea is malicious, but because sand simply cannot hold form by itself. And that's the crucial point. An identity that is purely self-created, ungrounded in anything beyond itself, is like that face in the sand. It is fundamentally unstable and it just can't endure. The erasure isn't some inevitable destruction, it's the natural consequence of being ungrounded.
So where does this leave us? We followed Foucault's archaeological diagnosis, and we viewed it through this ontological lens of privation. Now we're going to try to synthesize these two threads to consider what a path forward might look like, what it might mean to work toward a recovered, more stable understanding of the human person. This offers a really crucial reframing of Foucault's entire project. Instead of seeing him as a nihilist, we can see his work as a form of negative theology, which is a way of understanding something by defining what it is not. Foucault performs a kind of negative archaeology. He doesn't tell us what's true, but he is brilliant at showing us what has become incoherent. He reveals the shape of the darkness by outlining exactly where the light has been withdrawn. And this brings us to the ultimate conclusion of this whole line of thought. Foucault's critique is absolutely necessary. It clears away the false confidence of modernity. But critique alone is not enough. For human dignity to be stable, it can't be based on an autonomous, self-creating subject. It has to be grounded in an ordered participation in reality, a reality where meaning is something we receive, something we discover and respond to, not something we just invent from scratch. Let's just end with this final thought. The erasure Foucault described is not a final destiny. It's the outcome of a very specific condition, one where ungrounded forces are allowed to rule unchallenged. The promise of a recovered anthropology is that form is not lost forever. It suggests that if illumination returns, the human form can reappear. And this wouldn't be a new invention, not another face drawn in the sand, but a recognition of what was true all along. It's a profound idea to consider. Thank you for joining this explainer.